Men, like, traditionally they want a partner, they want a wife like their mom.
Not in a Freudian way, of course. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mehfoo's Musings. You are here on our second episode. My name is Sabah. If you've already heard the first episode, you know that I'm the founder and senior therapist at Mehfoo's Therapy. But today, I'm joined by.
Hello, I'm Aditi. My pronouns are she, her.
So, Aditi, how do you feel being here on our prestigious stage?
It's really nice to be here. I've always wanted to have like a very unfiltered conversation with you, and it's good to be on a podcast.
Unfiltered as opposed to all the team meetings where we have these conversations.
Probably, yes. Because here I think it's like a specific
Okay.
conversation, yeah.
How specific are we talking? So, just so everybody who's listening or watching us right now knows, apparently Aditi has a very strong question to start us off with, which I have no clue of. So, Aditi, would you like to take it ahead?
I think that is what I'm excited about the most.
So, to hurt me and to challenge me in front of our listeners.
I'll try for it to not be that way, but let's go. I was just wondering the other day, who do you think around us people pleases the most according to you?
In our team, or do you mean society?
We can start from there.
I don't think I should attack the few people who are ready to.
Let's start with the society.
Okay, let's go with
Yeah.
society. I think I'm very biased with how Mahfouz works to say that I think all of all marginalized communities, I would say, fall under the broad umbrella of people pleasing. Because to me, personally speaking, people pleasing is very much a survival tactic or survival strategy. So I feel like most people who have been marginalized or societally disadvantaged in some way definitely fall into it. Is that so broad that you don't have an answer from my answer?
No, but I think I do agree with you there. I mean, if we were put into the survival context, the way that you're describing it to be, which is very much a true experience for, as you said, marginalized community, right? It feels like there's no other option but to do so, to, like, the sense of safety being very important.
So, since you agree with me, did you have a more specific answer you were looking for? Because I know that when you came into this conversation, you were quite passionately already thinking about something.
I think a more specific way that, like, answer that I was looking for is how it kind of coincides with gender as well. Like, if we were to go down the road of marginalized communities, it's quite often like we notice around us, right? That, like one specific gender, traditionally, like conventionally, women, in households are very much expected to, like, people please in a way. The burden of carrying everybody's expectations while also prioritizing their needs.
Yeah, like you mean prioritizing others' needs over our own, right? I think that's a very basic default that has existed for people pleasing, regardless of what disadvantaged group we're talking about. If we really look at an example that most of us must have seen in traditional or culturally sound houses would be where we see the mom or the wife taking up that role of being the group's people pleaser, essentially.
Yeah. No, that brings up a lot of things, right? I mean, you can very much see that, like, how the mom in the family is expected to carry out certain expectations, be the fixer, be the person who's kind of relied upon the most, but it's also kind of glorified in a way. Like, there are so many chats on the online forums that we, like, go through, where they talk about how, men, like, traditionally they want a partner, they want a wife like their mom, where, they have glorified the struggles of their own mothers ki, like, she went through so and so and so for me and for our family and stuff like that, but wholly missing the entire point that she was not doing it because she enjoyed doing any of it, or she was in connect, like, she was in touch with any of her needs. She was doing it by abandoning her own needs in a way to prioritize the other family members' needs.
Honestly, I think, while I obviously agree, like there is no debate about it, I don't agree with a small part of it where you said that they don't want to do any of it. I think people pleasing traditionally, or you look at it across the years generationally, people pleasing has become so inherent to being a female, a cis female born into a traditional family, that most of the people who are in this or have been, let's say, in generations before ours, wanted this. They grew up shaping their life around it. where I'll grow up to learn how to cook, grow up learning how to stitch, I'll grow up learning how to cater to males in my family, regardless of whether they're older than me or younger than me, which also makes them be the same to their own partners, to their own in laws, and to their own kids, which then propagates the same thing. So when men on these forums are talking about this, they're not talking about they want someone like their mom to be their wife, not in a Freudian way, of course, but otherwise, what they're doing is they're talking about someone being subservient and serving them. Because the one thing that will exist in every marginalized community are people who don't want it to change because it's always serving them.
I think this is what answers my question as to like what I was looking for earlier by the entire thing that I asked you for. But like what you basically mean to say is that in a way it has become so inherent to like the cis women, the women growing up to be the moms and the wives and stuff. I think it doesn't even feel like not wanting to do thing anymore. It feels like a very it feels like it comes very naturally to them that this is something that I should be doing to be a good partner.
That's the thing about nature versus nurture. I think that's something that I also spoke a lot about in the previous podcast. So if you've not heard that, this is the good chance to listen to it. But for those who have, I'm just going to continue that conversation now, where a lot of when you're saying, they don't need to or they need to, also comes from what kind of nurturing they've had. If they feel like people pleasing is an inherent part to their nature and their what they want to nurture in themselves, that is exactly what they'll propagate, and which is what continues the trend where every girl who's born with the questions of cis woman has been born with questions about why do I have to do this, or why does he get these privileges while I don't, will always be someone, often another cis woman, who will say that it just is the way. And it has taken us this long to start diluting that generation by generation to reach a point where we are able to have these conversations where both of us, educated, uh, are able to have our whole spaces which can have these conversations, whether it's with clients or with each other. So, if you really had to think about it, Aditi, do you recognize what reasons could have existed for, let's say, cis women in household spaces to continue doing what they were doing? Other than, let's say, fear or need to survive, what else could be reasons?
That's a very like deep question if I were to actually think about it. Conditioning goes down to the roots of, how the person experienced love in the environment that they were growing up in, right? If any family member around the woman basically or the girl basically sees her questioning things or like not acting out the conventional route of what was prepared for her, love and connection and affection is what changes the experience of it all, completely changes for her.
So what you're saying is love and belongingness is where it's really at. And I don't want to be that person who keeps bringing up Maslow's hierarchy like we are in Psychology 101. But for those who don't know, a very simple explanation, there's a pyramid, there are certain levels on it, and you can't go up the levels until you've satisfied your lower level needs. So your needs start from your physiological needs, blah, blah, blah. It goes to a midpoint of love and belongingness, which I think is the core spot where most people get stuck, because after that is when you have feelings of pride, of self-esteem being built, of self-concept being built, and so on and so forth. So a lot of people you will meet who have a low sense of self, or who feel like their love, their care, and their wanting to spend energy on themselves comes from their environment, comes from their family, from their partner, from a potential partner who will in the future make me feel this way, might be coming from a low sense of self. That low sense of self might be coming from some degree of people pleasing that they feel like they need to do, where it might sound like, oh, but if I don't do these things for my partner, for my friend, for my parent, for my ABC, I won't get the love that I want. So they think the love they deserve is conditional to how much pleasing they do of said people.
And I almost feel like, to add to that, I almost feel like somewhere it even can feel very unsafe to be in such an environment. The thing that the way you mentioned the fear thing, right? I think it can also kind of, while the security thing, the security layer is below the love and belongingness layer, I feel sometimes that can even affect both of them at the same time. The love and belongingness being absent can feel very unsafe to be in that dynamic or consistently stay in one.
Which means that the real love and belongingness we really need to feel, and I am going to give a cheesy disclaimer right here, is the love and belongingness you need to offer yourself. I know this is transitioning into a TED talk that nobody wants to watch, but truly, in my own personal experience of improving my sense of self, of being able to do all of the things I've been able to do over the years, has come from knowing that I am worth it, full stop. Not I am worth it because, or I am worth it if, because those conditions are where people pleasing rests.
So, based on my lived experiences as a therapist and even as a human being, I have seen a lot of people pleasing happening around me and even within myself, right? Based on that, I feel one of the prominent things that has shown up even during our conversation was how it often comes at the cost of our own needs, basically, like prioritizing the other person's needs over our own.
Hmm.
We already did speak about it a little bit. I think how mothers are conditioned, to first prioritize their kids, their family members, and then even basically look at their own needs. I'm also sometimes wondering if it also leads to this thing where, or leads to a phase where they don't even know what they need anymore, or are they even in touch with their own needs at that point?
I think if you also look at, so going outside of people who are presenting as women, which is a very clear distinction that obviously we can see around, there's also a lot to do with people who are neurodivergent or queer or both, who feel like there's this need for them to tip the scales in favor of whoever is supporting them or not thinking of these things as flaws. Unfortunately, in a lot of places where we are still developing the idea around or the openness around being queer or being neurodivergent, there's a lot of prioritizing others over yourself that becomes a part of their default. Like a lot of people who will come out, or a lot of people who will, let's say, come out to a smaller circle first. You know, that initial phase of, oh, I'm going to tell my best friend and see how they feel about this. And
Yeah.
the whole thought even then is, let's see how they feel about me, which becomes immediately becomes a concept of, I'm going to prioritize their understanding of my experience over this beautiful sanctity of, me knowing myself better. Whether, and a lot of people feel this when they are realizing they're queer. A lot of people also feel this when they're realizing they are neurodivergent. At least with neurodivergence, more often than not, and hopefully more often than not, you're doing this with a therapist. But a lot of the queer understanding or the queer reflection that you're doing is a very isolating role. Of course, I'm not assuming the same for people who are in the recent generations who have that kind of support, whether online or in group spaces. When I grew up, the space that I grew up in, I don't think we had a lot of that space. So for me personally, I knew I was queer way before I knew I was anything else. And I knew I was neurodivergent way later. But my neurodivergence felt almost like a second coming out to me. Because suddenly I had this big thing that's going to create a ripple into my professional, into my personal, into my lifestyle entirely. And now I have to start thinking of, oh, am I going to tell people how open I want to be about it, how much of my figuring out phase is supposed to be public. There will always be a lot of, by default, prioritizing others, their needs, their expectations, their assumptions, what to do if they think of me these ways, instead of it just being about me and, wow, this is something I'm liking about myself. Wow, I'm able to accommodate for how much I hated a white light before. Or this is why I need to study the night before instead of a week in advance, or whatever it was. I spoke too fast, but I'm done speaking.
Hearing you talk about your own, like your own form of coming out when you understood your neurodivergence and, like, accommodated for it in a way, I feel like it brings up a lot of things for me as well. And despite knowing now that yes, I am a neurodivergent, there are so many subtle moments where I find myself still masking and still kind of, trying to, fit into the narrative that has been set up by the, neurotypical world around us. And it happens so subconsciously that, like, as I said, people pleasing within myself also, sort of a thing, is what I notice sometimes.
So, if you're thinking about people pleasing that happens within, do you have anything to say about that? Because I think a lot of listeners will relate to that.
If I were to think about it more deeply, I think one of the ways it connects to like everything that we've been speaking of, and my own like lived experiences, and like I feel like it has a lot to do with like earning what love means to me, like how I experience love needs to be earned in a way. And again, that connects with the whole how I accommodate for my own neurodivergence and how I mask very subconsciously sometimes as well.
I think masking to some degree can take, of course, a lot of shapes and forms, right? I think people pleasers have their own shade of masking also. Have you ever thought about it?
Not really, but now that you're telling me, I feel like, yeah, it looks different in different spaces as well, is what came for me when you told me this.
Because that's what a mask does, right? A mask in masking terms is not necessarily one mask that you're going to carry everywhere, but multiple masks you might put on depending on what you think the situation needs, which is people pleasing. People pleasing will always inherently be a mask because you're not being yourself if your only priority is someone else.
Yeah.
Because even in that, the other person is not your priority. You feeling satisfied because they feel okay becomes your priority. So your needs are being met only through someone else is inherently people pleasing or person pleasing in that case. And one thing about masks is one mask in this case does not fit all. So a lot of parents will try to raise children who are also people pleasing or subservient and expect them to take on the same masks they did. Why can't you be this way in front of this aunt? Oh, I trust this uncle. Why can't you trust them? Oh, I am able to speak in front of so many people. I sing on stage. I sing during our events. Why can't you do the same? All of these expectations, all of these standards for people pleasing come from masks that are not transferable or should not be transferable, but are still being attempted to generation by generation.
Yeah. And an extended layer to that also can be staying silent during confrontations, don't you think? I mean, if there is a conflict or if there is a confrontation around you that's happening, the way that you are told or expected to just stay quiet and like, maintain the peace in a way by staying quiet can also like have so much like going on underneath.
Yeah, silence is a very important element to this. Thank you for saying that.
I think another way that it does show up for me also is the whole fixing thing. I don't know if I'm being very clear about it, but if I were to share an experience, I think it as it comes very inherently to me. I don't really think how to exactly put it, but it's very much this role of always being the fixer. So whereas silence as a way to maintain peace was one thing on the whole like spectrum of like people pleasing, the fixing is another where I feel like me acting on something will make the situation feel better, or will please the people around me. I'm sorry.
That's so true.
Yeah.
A lot of clients also, in vague terms, have shown up needing some form of control in their life, and not having it or not being able to control the situation makes them act out. A lot of people think, okay, so I have some issues with control. I just need to learn how to let go of it and I'll be okay. When really, a lot of times at the root of it is the idea of people will be pleased when I can maintain this version of me, and this version of me only shows up in such situations. And then that's all they'll try to do. So they'll try to remake or mimic scripts that have worked in one place in every space. So what happens is, if the whole, let's say, group in my group project is pleased when I took over, I made the presentation, I just asked them to do the bare minimum, they just had to stand behind beside me while I presented it, so we all got the marks, is what they thought their version of people pleasing is. They will try to mimic it in every part of their life. They will want to be the one who at home figures out how to use the internet or knows who to call for what, and that becomes their identity. So a lot of who you are as a person might be a mystery to you because your life experiences have been built around people pleasing.
And while actually talking about this, the like the slip of tongue that I went into, and I went into how the quick apology that I had will please the people around me. I'm sorry. It also made me realize how even over apologizing can be a part of it, right? Like people pleasing.
So true. When you think of over apologizing, I think there's nobody better in that or at that than any person in a collectivist society. I feel like any individual born in a collectivist setting is encouraged to over apologize, whether in words or in actions or in guilt that they feel because they haven't provided something or done something the right way for someone else. And it really eats at you. Like it becomes such a default to feel that every you will cap these events in the shower, or all of these memes that exist that, oh, I have shower thoughts, but mine are just about being sad, about regretting past events. They are spaces of regret, of shame, of guilt, of all of these because of the people pleasing, more often than not. I wouldn't say it's always the case, but a lot of times your over apologizing is a gateway drug almost to repeatedly pleasing people so that you feel a little better about yourself.
It also makes me wonder what would happen if we wouldn't, like if we wouldn't apologize, or if we wouldn't keep over apologizing for things that felt more connected to what our needs look like. Just a thought.
It's very interesting you're saying that because I think a lot of people, in the fear of not knowing what lies on the other side, never attempt to find out.
That is so true. While we were speaking of this, I think this question did bring up a few things about how, like somewhere around the fact that when we talk about people pleasing, it's more about the fear that comes up by, you know, processing the emotions that will come or that we predict might come because we have not pleased the other person.
You know what this is making me think of? I don't know if you've seen the show Modern Family, have you?
Yes, yes, I have. One of my favorites, actually.
Of course, perfect. So in Modern Family, I feel like there are a lot of characters, or I think almost every character has people pleased at least once or twice throughout the show. I mean, with a show that large, it's very obvious that they have. But who do you think of when you think of people pleasing?
Honestly, Phil. He is the first person that
Okay.
comes to mind, especially because of his dynamic with Jay. But yeah, he's the first person that comes to me. I think not just Jay. I feel like if we were to talk about people pleasing and other aspects of it, even the thing around being a cool dad to Luke specifically, I think, yeah, it shows up there as well.
Yes. Yes. To all of them.
To all of them. Yeah.
Even how much he wants to accept Dylan so that Haley thinks better or thinks of him as a cool dad is also coming from a place of people pleasing. So much of his identity he was trying to change around Dylan to seem like one of the guys is a lot about people pleasing. But there are other forms of people pleasing that are more subtle, where Claire is a huge people pleaser. Even though she is so sure of herself and all of those things that do exist, think about how she was when she started working with her dad's company. Think of how she was when she got. There was this episode where she gets locked into one of the wardrobes that were being made, and instead of asking for help, she tries to get out of it so much that she dominoes all of them, and the entire warehouse falls apart.
I do remember that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That then her not being able to tell her father that she's so sick and nauseous that she can't do an interview that she really wanted her dad to be pleased by. People pleasing. If you think about a lot of her complaining that Phil always gets to play the good cop, was that she never got to do that people pleasing or receive that kind of appreciation because in her head, people pleasing is one of the only ways she could get that appreciation. So being a good cop or agreeable to her kids could be a gateway to getting that kind of love that Phil was getting, was her theory.
But I also feel like a little tangent here that I could go ahead with was that because Phil already took up that space in their life as a parent, Claire was automatically put in the position of like not being able to people please at all. So I think the way that she took people pleasing with the kids was by being the fixer, was by being the one who could be relied upon, by taking care of things that Phil couldn't because Phil wanted to be the cool dad. So I think that is one of the tangents that I could think of. Yeah.
And even here, if you think about gender roles, Phil felt more of a need, or felt like his need, of course, needs to be met of being the people pleaser dad because of, oh, but Jay doesn't love me, so at least my kids should. But wasn't Claire going through the same thing? But she was quite agreeable to him taking the lead. Even if she grumbled, she never actually put a stop to him being the cool dad or the good cop between the two of them.
That is a very interesting thought. Yes. Having very similar experiences in terms of how you're perceived by your kids, but one person gets the leeway and is actually able to act on what they feel like a cool parent should be like, but the other one being automatically fixated in the post of fixing for the other kids, being the reliant one, and sometimes even being the strict parent, right? I think, yeah.
And then if you think about Dee, who is her mom, her entire identity is based on how much she likes her brother Mitchell over Claire. Where most of her childhood was her trying to people please her mom, and when she saw that it's never going to lead anywhere, she flipped on the other end of it, where she went into becoming a rebel. Much like what she saw in Haley, which scared her in the first place, that she did not want history to repeat itself. So, to some degree, we can see that Claire regrets the rebel phase, maybe, or regrets the choices she made that led her to that point, which is why she felt so strongly about Haley not repeating her mistakes. Which, unfortunately, through the cycle of people pleasing and the harsh back and forth of it, Haley ended up doing a lot of what her mom also did.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it ended up happening. I think while we are speaking of this, the episode of how the entire episode goes by showing us how Mitchell and Dee Dee are like one team, but towards the end of it, throughout the entire episode, Claire is feeling lonely and kind of, alone through her own struggles and stuff like that. But towards the end, it's shown that, both both Jay and Claire are together on the bed, and they are talking to, Dee Dee and Mitchell. So it kind of very much shows that contrasting thing that, it was already built upon, that this was the dynamic that it is supposed to go about. But one took it very differently because she had very different experiences. Claire is who I'm talking about here. But yeah, with Haley, that was a very interesting point. I agree.
Honestly, all three kids, but I think if we really got into that, that would be
That
a
would
lot of
be
the
a huge
conversation.
tangent, yes.
Yeah. But this also does bring us towards the end of our podcast. What I'm going to do is very nicely remind people that if you would like to participate in our podcast to some degree, our voice lines, I'm just kidding, our email ID right here is open right now. It's called mehfoozmusings@gmail.com. That's right here in front of you. If you would like to record a voice note, send it across. It would be great for us to be able to hear it. This time we're opening it up wider. We're not just letting you ask us questions that therapists answer. We're also opening up this space for you to be able to share wins. So, say therapy wins or wins that you've been able to make across your mental health, or anything that you feel like you're able to do more of because of certain progress that you've intentionally put into yourself. You can send us voice notes, you can send us your little wins, you can be as anonymous or as known or as vocal as you want to be about your identity, and we will all listen to it together and react to it. And with how excited Aditi seems of these offers that we have for everybody, I think she's going to be one of the callers or people who's sending in their audio next time.
Definitely. I think I'm going to be there. And I would like to join the podcast again sometime.
We'll see if you make the cut, Aditi. So, on that note, we're going to be ending today. Thankfully, the sun has graced me with this little duotone effect that you're all seeing right here. So, before it covers me completely, we're going to try to finish this. I would like to thank every listener who's still stuck around, who's listening to this, who's trying to support us in whatever way they can. We are also on Instagram, we are on Pinterest, we are on Twitter/X, we are on TikTok, we are anywhere else. I think that's about it for now. And we are on YouTube, of course, where you must be watching this video. If you'd like to support us, please do subscribe, like, comment, share, all of the things that I forgot to say in the first episode. I really hope that everybody listening has a great week ahead. We are hoping that we can do this a lot more often. Eventually, we'll be able to get the knack of editing it, and we'll be able to produce more of such podcasts soon. Until then, Aditi, do you have anything to say?
I hope you had fun. We loved having you along with us throughout the podcast. And of course, you can all share your experiences about the podcast on the Gmail ID that was shared below. We would love to hear it.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great week ahead.
Have a great week ahead. Bye.
Bye.